A man entrusted his girlfriend to the care of his closest friend before leaving for the army. When he returned, he discovered something unexpected waiting for him. The sun filtered through the dusty blinds, casting long lines of light across Keenan's room. He blinked his eyes open, squinting at the digital clock on his nightstand. "Shit," he muttered under his breath. It was 7:43 a.m. He was supposed to be at work by 8. Throwing the blanket off, he scrambled out of bed, his feet hitting the cold floor with a dull thud. There was no time for breakfast today. Keenan pulled on his work boots, grabbed a faded flannel shirt from the back of his chair, and quickly shoved his arms through the sleeves. As he rushed into the hallway, the familiar creak of his father's wheelchair reached him from the kitchen. He knew what was coming. He could already feel the tension in the air, thick as ever, hanging over their heads like a rain cloud that never quite broke. "Keenan!" his father called out, the word heavy, loaded with years of unspoken guilt and concern. "You're late again." Keenan didn't answer, heading straight for the front door, but he didn't make it far before Matthew's voice stopped him cold. "Hold on," Matthew said. His tone wasn't sharp, but it carried the weight of their shared history, the pain, the disappointment, the endless cycle of conversations that always led nowhere. "We need to talk." Keenan sighed and turned, his hand resting on the doorknob, but his father was already wheeling into the living room, cutting off his escape route. Matthew's eyes, lined with years of sleepless nights and unspoken fears, locked onto his son. "I've been telling you for months now, Keenan," Matthew began, his voice rough and unsteady. "You gotta be careful about who you run with. You think those friends of yours are gonna look out for you? One bad decision and you'll end up just like me." He gestured to his legs, his wheelchair creaking with the motion. "Is that what you want?" Keenan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence wasn't defiance. It never was. It was his shield, the only thing that kept him from unraveling. He stared at the floor, hoping the conversation would end the way it usually did, with Matthew giving up and Keenan slipping out the door before it got worse. But today wasn't like the others. Matthew wasn't letting it go. "You never say nothin'." Matthew's voice was strained, almost pleading. "Every time I talk to you, it's like talking to a wall. I know I wasn't there for you the way I should have been, all right? I know I failed you after your mom—" He stopped, his voice catching. "After the accident, I couldn't be the father you needed, and I get that. But you can't keep walking around like the world don't matter to you." Keenan's fingers gripped the doorknob. Matthew shifted in his wheelchair, rubbing his face with his rough hands, hands that had once been strong and capable before the accident. "I'm scared for you, son," he said more quietly now. "You're quiet like me. Too quiet. I see the way people look at you when you don't say much, the way they start wondering what's going on in your head." Keenan wasn't quiet because he didn't care. His father sighed deeply, his eyes softening. "I don't want you to end up alone like me, Keenan. Just think about what I'm saying. That's all I'm asking." Keenan finally looked up, meeting his father's gaze. There was so much he wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. They never did. He gave a small nod instead, not because he agreed, but because he knew it would be enough to end the conversation for now. Matthew watched him for a long moment, then nodded back, though the worry in his eyes never left. "Go on, you're late for work." Keenan heard the long, drawn-out blare of a car horn outside, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced up from the kitchen table and out the window. Philip's beat-up truck was parked out front, dust swirling around the wheels, the engine rumbling like it was on its last leg. Matthew, still at the table, looked up from the newspaper he'd been pretending to read, his weathered face softening for a moment. "Good luck, son," he said in that quiet, gravelly voice of his, a rare show of something that almost resembled warmth. Keenan nodded, though it wasn't clear if it was meant for his father or just part of his routine. He grabbed his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and headed out the door. Outside, Philippe leaned against his truck, arms crossed over his chest, the familiar grin on his face like he hadn't a care in the world. The truck, on the other hand, had seen better days, rust crawling up the sides, a cracked windshield, and tires that probably should have been replaced 2 summers ago. Philip gave Keenan a mock salute as he walked up. "Took your time, didn't you?" Philip said, grinning, his eyes glinting with mischief. Keenan shrugged, his expression as neutral as ever. "Late for work?" Yeah, always the same with you," Philip teased, opening the passenger side door for Keenan, like he was some kind of chauffeur. "Get in, we'll make it. Eventually." Keenan climbed in, settling into the worn seat that sagged beneath him. Philippe slid into the driver's seat and started the engine with a sputter. They pulled away from the curb, making small talk as they usually did, Philippe doing most of the talking, filling the silence with chatter about nothing in particular. He glanced sideways at Keenan every now and then, his grin slowly fading into something a little more thoughtful, a little less certain. "What's with the face, man?" Philip finally asked, eyes on the road but his tone probing. "You look like someone just told you Christmas is canceled." Keenan shrugged again, looking out the window, the trees and houses blurring into a green and brown haze. "We're late. Just drive." Philip glanced at him, one eyebrow raised but didn't push. He turned the wheel sharply, veering off the main highway and onto a bumpy dirt road that kicked up dust behind them. Keenan sat up straighter, frowning. "Where are we going?" Philip didn't answer right away, just kept his hand steady on the wheel as they rattled down the narrow road, the sound of the engine struggling filling the cab. After a few minutes, they pulled up near a creek. Philip killed the engine and hopped out. "Come on," he said over his shoulder, already walking towards the creek. Keenan stayed in the truck, watching as Philip made his way down to the water's edge. He didn't move until Philip turned around and shouted, "Hey, get out here, man! I want to talk!" Reluctantly, Keenan opened the door and stepped out. His boots crunched against the dry earth as he walked over, standing over Philip, who had taken a seat on the edge of the creek, kicking small rocks into the water. "We're late for work," Keenan said, his voice flat, but Philip wasn't listening. "I'm quittin'," Philip said, eyes fixed on the slow-moving water, his voice low and casual, as if he'd just announced he was switching brands of coffee. Keenan didn't say anything for a moment, then replied, "Okay." He stood there, staring into the distance, not really looking at anything, just avoiding the conversation. Philip let the silence stretch between them for a few minutes, then spoke again, his tone different now, quieter. "Keenan," he said, not looking up, Are we best friends?" Keenan didn't flinch, didn't even glance at Philip. He just kept his eyes on the horizon, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Of course." There was a shift in the air, something Keenan could feel more than see. Philippe's grin was gone, replaced by an expression that didn't fit his face. Something sad, something heavy. His hands, usually in constant motion, picking at something or drumming on his legs, were still now. "I need a favor," Philip said, his voice softer than Keenan had ever heard it. Keenan frowned slightly, still staring off into the distance. "What's up?" Philip swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "I enlisted," he said, his voice breaking the stillness like a stone tossed into the creek. "I'm leaving for the army." Keenan stood there, eyes still fixed on the horizon, his expression unchanged as Philip's words hung in the air. The only response that came from him was a simple, "That's a bummer." Philippe shifted on the ground, plucking at the blades of grass by the creek, clearly thinking hard about something. "Yeah, well, it's not just that," Philip said after a moment. "I'm worried about Taylor." Keenan's gaze shifted slightly, but his voice remained as even as ever. "What's there to worry about?" Philippe let out a small, uneasy laugh. "Well, what if she won't wait for me?" Keenan didn't hesitate. His response was quick, cutting through the tension like a knife. "If she loves you, she'll wait. No problem." Philip's face softened, and he glanced over at his friend. "Yeah, I guess you're right." He paused, fidgeting a little before he spoke again. "But just in case, can I ask you to look after her?" For the first time that day, Keenan let out a short laugh, a sound so rare it startled even himself. It wasn't that the question was funny, it was the absurdity of it. Keenan, of all people, being asked to look after someone else's girl? That was rich. "How does that work?" Keenan asked, half smiling, genuinely curious now. Philip turned to face him, a serious look on his face. "Well, meet her from school, make sure she isn't out late, and if necessary, punch those who dare to be near her. You know, protect her so guys don't mess with her. Will you do that for me?" Keenan stared at Philip for a moment, trying to picture himself in that role. It seemed ridiculous. The thought of him, silent and brooding, acting as a guard dog for Taylor, was almost laughable. And yet, there was something in Philip's tone, something that told Keenan this wasn't just some joke. Philip was genuinely asking, and it took him by surprise. Keenan smiled, a rare and genuine one, then let out a deep sigh. "Yeah, I'll do it." Philip's face lit up with relief. "Thanks, man. You're my best friend. Really." Keenan just nodded, not feeling the need to say anything more. He understood. That was enough. The two of them sat in silence after that. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a while neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. It was a quiet moment, but one heavy with meaning. A week later, Keenan found himself standing across the street from the high school, the same one he had dropped out of a few years back. He leaned against a tree, arms crossed, trying not to look too out of place. He wasn't exactly sure why he'd agreed to Philip's request, but a promise was a promise. He scanned the faces of the students trickling out of the building, looking for Taylor. When he finally spotted her, he pushed off from the tree and jogged toward her, his steps quick but awkward, like someone who wasn't used to running up to people in public. "Hey," Keenan greeted her, short and to the point, just as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Taylor stopped and frowned, clearly surprised to see him there. Her backpack hung lazily off one shoulder, and she tilted her head as she looked him up and down. "What are you doing here?" Keenan straightened up, trying to appear more official than he felt. "Philip asked me to meet you after school, while he's away," he said, his voice flat and formal, as if he were delivering a message from the post office. For a moment, Taylor's expression didn't change, but then a slight smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She nodded, almost amused by his seriousness. "I see." Without saying anything more, she started walking down the street, and Keenan, unsure what else to do, fell into step beside her. The silence stretched between them, the only sound their footsteps on the pavement. Keenan glanced sideways at her, trying to figure out if she found this whole thing as awkward as he did. She didn't seem bothered, though, just walking at her usual pace, occasionally kicking at a rock on the sidewalk. After a few minutes, Taylor spoke up, her voice casual. "He's really worried about me, huh?" Keenan kept his eyes forward, shrugging a little. "Yeah, wants to make sure you're all right." Taylor let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Typical Philip. He's always been like that, trying to protect me even when I don't need it." Keenan didn't reply. He wasn't good with this kind of talk. Feelings, protection, all of it seemed like foreign territory. "So what's the plan?" Taylor asked after a pause, a teasing edge in her voice. "You gonna walk me home every day now?" Keenan scratched the back of his neck, feeling a bit out of his depth. "I guess." Taylor smirked. Keenan shrugged again, his expression as neutral as ever. They kept walking. A few days later, the bass thumped through the house, vibrating the floors and walls, while young voices filled the space with laughter and shouts. The party was in full swing, kids crammed into every corner, dancing wildly. In the middle of it all, a girl in a yellow shirt held a plastic cup brimming with what looked like innocent ice cream. But everyone in the know understood the secret. It was spiked, carefully hidden from the watchful eyes of any adults. Taylor, with her wild energy, darted over to the girl and scooped a spoonful of the ice cream, savoring the taste as she grinned. She didn't care what was in it, just that it fueled the carefree mood of the night. She danced in the center of the room, her movements erratic and bold, drawing the attention of the crowd. Her hair whipped around her face as she spun in circles, lost in the music, in the moment. But suddenly, something shifted. She stopped dancing, her gaze flicking toward a shadow in the corner of the room. Without saying a word, she started pushing through the crowd, heading for the other room. Keenan was standing by the window, half hidden behind a curtain, staring down at his phone, barely acknowledging the chaos around him. He wasn't there to party. He wasn't even sure why he'd come in the first place. Well, that wasn't true. Philip was the reason. He had promised. Even so, Keenan wasn't the type to blend into these kinds of scenes. Taylor stormed up to him, her steps uneven, her face flushed from dancing and whatever else was in that ice cream. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply, her voice louder than necessary, startling him out of his focus. Keenan, caught off guard, blinked and licked his lips before answering, "I'm here to make sure nothing happens to you." Her expression darkened, her eyes narrowing. "I don't need a babysitter," she snapped, her voice cutting through the noise of the party. "I'm fine. Get lost, Keenan." For a moment, Keenan just stared at her, his face as unreadable as ever. He wasn't the type to argue, especially not with someone as fired up as Taylor. With a shrug of his shoulders, he turned without a word and walked toward the door, leaving the room behind him. Taylor stood there watching him go, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, her anger flickered, replaced by something else, something that made her pause. But she shook it off, her lips pressing into a thin line as she turned back toward the party, the music still pounding, the crowd still dancing. The night was giving way to the soft glow of dawn, and the air was thick with the sound of crickets. The last remnants of the party had disappeared, leaving Taylor walking down the dirt road, holding her phone. Philip's voice crackled on the other end, but a few feet away, Keenan followed in silence, his hands shoved into his pockets. Taylor sighed into the phone, her frustration spilling out. "Is Keenan just going to keep following me like this until you come back?" Her voice had an edge of annoyance. Philippe's voice was calm but firm. "He's just looking out for you, Tay. You know I'm worried." "I'm not a little girl anymore, Philip. I don't need a bodyguard," she snapped, her grip tightening around the phone. "What do you think is going to happen, huh?" There was a pause on the other end. Then Philippe's voice came through, quieter now, but full of concern. "Well, what if something does happen?" Taylor rolled her eyes, about to fire back when Philip cut in. "I've got to go. My phone time's up. Just take care, okay?" With a huff, Taylor hung up, shoving her phone into her pocket. She muttered something under her breath and kept walking, the dirt road stretching out in front of her. Up ahead, the headlights of a parked car flickered in the gloom. The door creaked open, and a figure stumbled out, moving slowly toward the road. It was a burly man, middle-aged, disheveled, and reeking of booze, his clothes wrinkled and his steps unsteady. "Hey there," the man slurred, his eyes locking onto Taylor as he moved closer. "Need a ride?" Taylor's shoulders stiffened. "No thanks," she said quickly, trying to keep her voice steady. She tried to walk past him, but before she could, the man grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "Come on," he coaxed, his voice thick with drunken insistence. I'll give you a ride. It's a long walk. His grip tightened, and he grabbed her other arm, pulling her toward him. I said no. Taylor's voice wavered as she tried to wrench herself free, panic rising in her chest. Suddenly, there was a rush of movement. Keenan bolted forward, his face hard and focused, and grabbed the man by the shoulder, pulling him away from Taylor. Get your hands off her, Keenan said, his voice low and steady, though there was an unmistakable tension in it. The man blinked, clearly surprised by Keenan's sudden presence. His confusion quickly gave way to anger. Who the hell are you? He snarled, shoving Keenan backward. Mind your own damn business. Keenan barely moved, his body like a stone, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. I said, stay away from her. The man lunged at Keenan, shoving him again, harder this time. They stumbled, grappling with each other in the middle of the road. Keenan ducked a wild punch and pushed back, his body instinctively moving to shield Taylor from the man. Fury flashed in the drunk's eyes as he swung at Keenan, his fists clumsy but dangerous. Keenan dodged, catching the man by the collar and shoving him off balance. They struggled in the half-light, the fight clumsy and brutal, dirt kicking up around them as they pushed each other back and forth. The drunk man, red-faced and panting, finally tripped, falling to the ground in a heap. He cursed under his breath, scrambling to get up, but Keenan stood over him, his fists clenched. Stay down, he growled, his voice steady but full of warning. The man, disoriented and now realizing he was outmatched, groaned and staggered toward his car, muttering incoherently as he fumbled for the door handle. You're gonna regret this, he slurred, before collapsing into the driver's seat and slamming the door. Keenan stood there, breathing heavily, as the car's headlights flickered off, the man's engine coughing to life before the vehicle lurched down the road, disappearing into the distance. For a moment, there was only the sound of the crickets and the fading roar of the car's engine. Keenan limped his way home, each step a reminder of the fight. His knuckles ached from hitting the drunkard, and his knee throbbed with every movement. The street was quiet now, the party long over, and the early morning was wrapped in the stillness that comes just before sunrise. As he turned the corner nearing his house, he froze. Taylor was standing there, waiting for him. Their eyes met, and for the first time her face wasn't filled with anger or frustration. She was smiling, an expression he hadn't expected. Keenan approached her, his pace slow, still holding his aching hand with the other. He leaned against the cold wall, trying to ignore the sting in his body. Taylor stepped closer, her smile lingering. You all right? She asked, her voice soft, genuine concern flickering in her eyes. Keenan looked at her briefly and nodded, quick and short, not wanting to make a big deal of it. But she wasn't fooled. She noticed the way he avoided opening his mouth too wide, his lips slightly swollen, probably trying to hide the fact that he might have lost a tooth. Does it hurt? She asked again, quieter this time, her gaze never leaving his face. Not really, he muttered, though it was clear he was trying to downplay it. Taylor wasn't convinced. She pulled a crumpled napkin from her pocket and, without asking, gently dabbed at the bruise on his mouth. Keenan winced, grumbling at the pain, but she shushed him, her touch surprisingly gentle. Shh, she said with a small smile. Hold still. Keenan mumbled something under his breath but complied, standing there as she wiped away the dried blood. It stung, but there was something calming about her being there, something he hadn't expected to feel. When she finished, Taylor stepped back, slipping the napkin back into her pocket. Thanks, she whispered, her voice sincere. Keenan sighed, and for the first time that night, a slight smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. They stood in silence, the space between them no longer filled with tension, just a quiet understanding. After a while, Taylor hesitated, glancing down at the ground before looking back up at him. So, are you gonna meet me tomorrow after school? As usual? Keenan glanced at her, his expression still neutral but a flicker of something softer in his eyes. Uh-huh, he replied, his usual brevity not bothering her this time. Taylor smiled, a genuine smile, and for a moment, the weight of the night seemed to lift. Keenan shifted his weight, wincing slightly, and Taylor caught it. "Let me take you home," Keenan said, his voice quieter now, more relaxed. They began walking slowly, the tension from earlier gone. The silence between them felt different now, like it didn't need to be filled with words. After a few steps, Keenan shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Taylor's shoulders without saying a word. Taylor smiled, pulling the jacket closer around her, the warmth a welcome comfort against the cool morning air. They continued walking together, side by side. The soft knock of Taylor's heels on the pavement seemed to echo in the still air. Her wavy hair bounced with every graceful step, catching the light in a way that made it seem alive, swirling with each movement. Today she looked different, more put together, more polished. She wore a skirt that fell just above her knees, paired with a jacket over a crisp white blouse that accentuated her chest. The heels made her steps seem effortless, as if she'd been walking in them her whole life. Keenan stood under the tree, his usual spot, watching her approach. He couldn't help but notice the change, the way she carried herself, and something inside him stirred, though he couldn't quite name it. He stayed quiet, following her with his eyes until she was close enough to greet him first. "Hey," Taylor said, her voice soft but deliberate. "Hey," Keenan replied, just as brief, his expression the same calm mask as ever. But even in his quietness, there was a flicker of curiosity behind his eyes. For a moment, Taylor hesitated, her gaze darting to the ground and then back to him. It was clear she had something to say, but the words didn't come easily. She shifted slightly, the fabric of her skirt brushing against her legs as she fidgeted. "So," she began, her voice trailing off before she took a breath and continued, "Tony's hosting a party tomorrow." Keenan didn't react right away, just stood there waiting. His stillness had always been unnerving to others, but Taylor was used to it by now. She glanced at him, her lips pressing together as she gathered her thoughts. "I was wondering if you were coming with me, to make sure I'm okay." Her tone was casual, but there was something beneath it. Keenan gave a small nod, as if the answer was obvious. "Okay," he said simply, his voice as steady as ever. Taylor smiled, relieved, though she quickly tucked the smile away as they fell into step beside each other. Keenan tilted his head slightly, indicating that it was time to go, and without another word, they began walking down the familiar path together. The silence between them was comfortable now, a far cry from the awkwardness that had once marked their every interaction. They didn't need to fill the space with chatter. It was enough just to walk, side by side, the soft click of Taylor's heels the only sound cutting through the quiet of the early evening. Keenan didn't glance at her again, but there was something in the air between them, a new, unspoken understanding that neither of them fully recognized yet. The party had slowed to a hum, the wild energy from earlier dissipating as the night wore on. Soft, beautiful music filled the room, the kind that made everything feel distant and quiet. Only a few couples remained on the floor, swaying gently in time with the melody, lost in their own worlds. Among them were Keenan and Taylor, moving in their awkward, uneven rhythm. Keenan's hands rested stiffly on Taylor's waist, as if afraid to touch her too much, and he kept himself at a careful distance, trying not to notice the warmth of her body or the way her perfume seemed to wrap around him. He focused on his feet, making sure not to step on hers, all the while feeling like an outsider in his own skin. Taylor, on the other hand, had her arms loosely draped around his neck, her fingers brushing against the nape of his neck. She smiled softly, though Keenan couldn't see it. They moved together in that same awkward circle for what felt like forever, the space between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, Taylor did something that caught Keenan completely off guard. She let go of his neck and wrapped her arms tightly around his back, pulling him close, so close that he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. Her grip was firm, almost desperate, and for a moment, Keenan froze, his mind spinning. He glanced around, his eyes darting to see if anyone was watching, but no one seemed to notice or care. The other couples were too absorbed in their own slow, intimate dances. Keenan's heart raced, and 1,000 thoughts flooded his mind. What was happening? Why was she doing this? He felt a pang of guilt rise in his chest. This was Philip's girlfriend, his best friend, the one who had trusted him to look out for Taylor. And here they were, in the middle of a slow dance, her arms wrapped tightly around him. He swallowed hard, unsure of what to do, unsure of what he felt. His hands remained where they were, but the distance between them had vanished. She was pressed against him, and all he could feel was the tension, the confusion, and the warmth of her body against his. "Taylor," he started, his voice a low whisper, uncertain. But Taylor didn't move, didn't let go. Instead, she buried her face into him, her breath warm against his chest. Keenan felt her shudder slightly, and it wasn't until that moment that he realized she wasn't just holding him. She was holding on to him, like she needed something solid, something real. "I'm sorry," Taylor whispered into his shirt, her voice trembling. I don't want to be alone right now." Keenan's chest tightened at her words, the raw vulnerability in her voice striking him harder than he expected. She wasn't just asking for comfort, she was pleading for it. Keenan didn't know how to respond. He didn't know how to tell her everything would be fine, because he wasn't sure it would. Philip was gone, and though he had promised to protect Taylor, he hadn't expected it to become this. He hadn't expected the closeness, the confusing feelings, the way Taylor was looking at him right now. Keenan's grip tightened slightly, his mind a mess of thoughts, emotions swirling together in a way he couldn't untangle. "It's okay," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if it really was. But right now, in this moment, it felt like the only thing he could say. They stayed like that, standing still while the world around them continued to turn. The music played on, slow and haunting, and for a little while, neither of them moved. Taylor clung to Keenan like he was the only thing keeping her grounded, and Keenan stood there holding her, knowing that this moment, whatever it was something they couldn't take back. The night was quiet as Keenan and Taylor walked side by side, the cool breeze brushing against them. Taylor had his jacket draped over her shoulders, its weight a small comfort against the chill. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the party. The silence felt different now, heavier, more charged, like there were things they both knew but didn't want to say out loud. As they walked, Keenan kept his gaze straight ahead, focusing on the sound of their footsteps, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. His mind was still replaying the events of the night, the dance, the way Taylor had held him, the way she had leaned into him like she needed something more than just comfort. Something big was happening. Then suddenly Taylor stopped. Keenan, like her shadow, mirrored her movement and stopped too. They stood there on the quiet street, bathed in the pale light of a distant street lamp, the air around them thick with something unspoken. Keenan kept his eyes forward, not daring to look at her, his heart pounding harder than it should have been. Finally, Taylor turned to him, her eyes locking onto his. Keenan could feel the weight of her gaze, the intensity in her expression. She looked at him for what felt like forever, and Keenan knew, he knew without her saying a word, that this was a moment that would change everything. "I love you." Taylor said, her voice soft but steady, the words landing between them like a shockwave. Keenan's heart skipped a beat, his breath catching in his throat. His mind went blank for a second, but then like a flood, a million thoughts rushed in all at once. He blinked, staring at her, unable to process what she had just said. Before he could even find the words to respond, Taylor spoke again, this time her voice quieter, but full of expectation. "Are you going to kiss me?" That question hit him like a punch to the gut. Keenan's body tensed, his chest tightening as he stared at her, flabbergasted. He hadn't seen this coming. None of it. The dance, the hug, and now this? His best friend's girlfriend was standing in front of him, telling him she loved him and asking if he would kiss her. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream he couldn't wake up from. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why? The question burned in his thoughts. Why now? Why him? Why did he have to go through this, carrying the weight of promises made to Philip, only to end up in a situation like this? It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. He had been there for Taylor, but not for this. Not for feelings that shouldn't exist, not for words that should have never been spoken. Keenan's breath quickened, his usually calm demeanor cracking under the pressure of the moment. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, and he clenched his fists at his sides, trying to find some kind of anchor in the storm of emotions raging inside him. Without thinking, he stepped back, shaking his head. "No," he muttered, more to himself than to her. His voice was low and rough, like the words were stuck in his throat. Taylor's expression faltered, her eyes searching his face for something, but Keenan didn't give her the chance to say anything else. He breathed out sharply, the sound almost like a frustrated sigh, and before she could react, he took off. He waved her off with one hand, his steps quick and determined, like he needed to get as far away from her as possible. Keenan walked fast, the cold air hitting his face as he distanced himself from the moment, from her. His mind was still racing, but one thought kept repeating over and over. This can't be happening. It shouldn't be happening. The next day, Taylor stepped out of school, her eyes darting around the usual spot where Keenan waited for her. But today, there was no sign of him. Her heart sank, a strange uneasiness settling in her chest. She scanned the area, but Keenan was nowhere to be found. Something wasn't right. She felt it deep inside. After a few minutes of waiting, Taylor decided to walk toward Keenan's house. Maybe he had gone home, maybe something had come up. But when she reached his front door and knocked, there was no answer. Keenan wasn't home either. Meanwhile, Keenan stood by the creek, the same place where everything seemed to unravel. The gentle sound of the water moving over the rocks usually calmed him, but not today. He stared at the water, lost in a war with himself, his heart and mind pulling him in different directions. He liked Taylor. In fact, he had liked her for as long as he could remember, ever since the first time he saw her with Philip. It wasn't something he could control. It was just there, growing in the silence, in the moments he spent watching from the sidelines as his best friend held her hand, laughed with her, kissed her. But there was Philip, and Philip trusted him. He had promised to take care of Taylor, to protect her, not to fall for her. The weight of that promise hung heavy on his chest. He couldn't betray his best friend. Friendship was the one thing that Keenan held sacred, the one thing he had always argued with his father about. Friendship had to come before everything else, even before feelings that cut deeper than he ever expected. He sighed, pulling his phone from his pocket, staring at the unread texts and missed calls from Taylor. He hadn't responded to any of them. He couldn't. He had to end this, whatever it was, before it spiraled out of control. Philip was supposed to come back soon, and Keenan couldn't let things get worse. He had already crossed lines he never should have crossed. One day, as he stepped outside his house, he saw her. Taylor, lingering near the edge of his driveway, looking for him. His heart clenched. He didn't want this confrontation. He didn't know how to explain to her why he had been avoiding her. Taylor saw him and rushed over, her eyes wide with concern. "Keenan!" she called out, her voice breathless as she came to a stop in front of him. "What's going on? Why have you been ignoring me? Did something happen?" Keenan looked away, his face a mask of indifference. He kept walking, hoping she would give up, but Taylor wasn't backing down. She walked after him, her voice growing more insistent. "Why won't you talk to me? Is something wrong?" she asked, her tone tinged with frustration. "Did I do something?" Keenan clenched his jaw, still refusing to look at her. "Nothing's wrong," he muttered, waving his hand as if to dismiss her entirely. But Taylor wasn't buying it. She stepped in front of him, forcing him to stop. "Is it because you're not interested in me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is it because I'm not your type? Or maybe because I'm ugly? Is that it?" Keenan froze, his heart twisting at her words. He shook his head, but before he could say anything, Taylor pressed on. "Is that why you won't talk to me? Because you don't like me?" His chest tightened, his mind screaming with the truth he couldn't say. The truth was, he liked her more than he ever should have. He liked her too much, and that was the problem. But how could he say that to her? How could he betray Philip like that? He finally met her gaze, his voice cold and distant as he spoke. "How can you tell me all this when you're with Philip?" Keenan's voice was strained, but he forced himself to keep speaking. "He's your boyfriend, and you're saying you love me?" Taylor's eyes searched his, confusion and hurt written all over her face. But Keenan cut her off, his words coming out sharper than he intended. "I don't love you. I never will. You need to stop this. Stop calling me. Stop texting me." Each word felt like a blade in his chest, cutting him deeper, but he kept going. "Stay away from me. Whatever this is, it's not right." Taylor's face fell, her eyes brimming with tears. She opened her mouth to protest, but Keenan shook his head, taking a step back. This was never supposed to happen. He knew he was lying, and every part of him burned with the weight of those lies. He did love her. He loved her more than he had ever admitted to himself. But friendship, loyalty, mattered more, and Keenan had made a promise. Taylor stood there, her lips parted, as if searching for something to say, something to hold on to. But Keenan had already turned away, his back to her. As he walked away from the only person who had ever made him feel something real. His hands trembled at his sides, and though his face was blank, inside he was unraveling. As he walked down the street, he whispered to himself, as if trying to believe it, "Friendship is above all." Philippe was back, though not for long. His contract with the army still had time left, but for now he was home, taking a short break from the endless routine of military life. He had called Keenan as soon as he arrived, wanting to catch up, to slip back into the ease of their friendship for however long he had. They met at their usual spot, a quiet clearing on the outskirts of town where they used to hang out in high school. Philip had brought some beers, something he had mentioned missing while he was away. As he fumbled with the bottle, he laughed, shaking his head. I haven't had a beer in so long, I think I forgot how to open one. Keenan chuckled. He said nothing, just took a long drink. They sat there side by side, talking about nothing in particular. The army, the town, old memories. Philip leaned back, a grin on his face as he stared up at the sky. Man, it's weird being home. Feels like everything's the same, you know? But not really. Army changes you. He took another sip of his beer, his eyes still lost in the clouds. But enough about me. How's life treating you these days? Keenan shrugged, his usual brief and quiet self. It's fine, he said, his voice low and calm. Philip laughed softly, shaking his head. Always the same, Keenan. You never change. Keenan just took another sip, staring out at the horizon, his mind far from the easy conversation. He could feel the weight of what wasn't being said building between them. He knew it was coming, the question he had been dreading since the moment Philippe had mentioned meeting up. After a few moments of silence, Philip finally asked the question. How's Taylor doing? The words hung in the air, heavy and expectant. Philip waited for a reply, his eyes on Keenan, but Keenan didn't speak right away. His gaze was fixed on the distance, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The quiet between them stretched on, the sound of crickets filling the space where words should have been. So many thoughts were swirling in Keenan's mind. The dance, the confession, the look in Taylor's eyes when she said she loved him. It all rushed back, a tidal wave of emotions he had tried to bury. There were so many things he wanted to say, needed to say, but none of them would come out. Finally, he tore his gaze from the horizon and glanced at Philippe. She's fine, Keenan said, his voice steady but flat. It was all he could manage. Philip nodded, letting the quiet settle between them for a moment before he cleared his throat and turned to Keenan. Listen, he started, his voice unusually soft, almost hesitant. I need to tell you something. I've fallen in love with someone. Keenan's heart stilled as he stared at Philip, the words not quite registering at first. Philip kept going, unaware of the internal chaos he was unleashing. She's a registered nurse, Philippe continued, his face lighting up in a way Keenan hadn't seen in a long time. We met while I was on base and, well, we're gonna get married. Soon. Keenan felt like the ground had been pulled from under him. His world tilted, spinning out of control. He sat there, his beer growing warm in his hand, as Philip's words cut through him, sharp and sudden. Philip's voice became more serious, a shadow of worry crossing his face. I don't know how to break the news to Taylor, he said, glancing at Keenan for reassurance. I feel bad. We've been together for so long and she's been good to me, but this is different. It's real. I just don't know how to tell her. Keenan's mouth went dry, and before he could react, Philip added, Do you think you could tell her for me? If words were daggers, Keenan would have been lying there, bleeding out, each syllable pierced through him, deeper than the last. Philip, his best friend, was asking him to tell Taylor, the girl he loved, that Philippe was leaving her, that Philip had fallen for someone else. Keenan stared at Philippe, unable to mask the pain twisting inside him. His entire belief in friendship, the code he had lived by, was crumbling in front of him. All this time, he had sacrificed his feelings, his connection to Taylor, for the sake of loyalty to his best friend. The irony of it all stung. Keenan had pushed Taylor away, told her he didn't love her, when the truth was he loved her more than he'd ever admitted to himself. And Philippe? Philippe had found love elsewhere, and now he wanted Keenan to deliver the news to Taylor, the girl who had just told him she loved him. Keenan's mind flashed back to that night, the night Taylor had asked him if he was going to kiss her, the night he had walked away, thinking he was doing the right thing. He had convinced himself that friendship meant protecting Philip at all costs, even if it meant breaking Taylor's heart and his own in the process. Now sitting there, Keenan was beginning to reconsider everything he had ever believed about loyalty, about friendship, about love. "Tell her for me, man. You're closer to her these days," Philip said, his voice casual, completely unaware of the turmoil he was causing. He took a sip of his beer, then added, "I think it'd be easier coming from you." Keenan's chest burned, every breath feeling heavier than the last. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white from gripping the bottle. For a moment he wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, scream at himself for what he had said to Taylor, scream at Philip for making him carry this burden. But he didn't. Keenan never screamed. He nodded instead, the action automatic, his mind still reeling. "Yeah," he heard himself say, his voice sounding distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I'll tell her."